Over 100 people listened to this in the dark, and 10 of them subscribed. If you're still awake, maybe it's your turn. Hit subscribe, and let's begin. Imagine driving through the dead of night when your GPS reroutes endlessly, your radio fills with whispers, and shadows loom just outside your headlights. These aren't campfire tales. They're real accounts from those who've dared to cross America's most haunted highways. Some drivers return with proof: muddy handprints, dashcam recordings, or cargo that vanishes without a trace. But the road leaves its mark in other ways. Watch how these drivers confronted the unexplainable and what kept them going when logic failed. For some, the aftermath meant sleepless nights, changed routes, or even walking away from the job. The first sign of trouble often comes quietly, just beyond the reach of the headlights. On Old Route 13 near the Atchafalaya Basin, the air hangs heavy with stories that don't fade with daylight. This is where the legend of Sam Red Harper and the Bridge of Whispers begins, on a stretch of road that's missing from most maps, deep in Louisiana's swamps. The basin's cypress groves and slow-moving water shape a world where the edges blur, and what's real doesn't always stay that way. Sam, a veteran trucker with around 20 years behind the wheel, had always dismissed the tales, until one fog-choked night forced him to reconsider. Sam was hauling a late-night load through the thick Louisiana dark. The road narrowed, the fog pressed in, and even the usual hum of insects faded into silence. That's when he saw the bridge, old iron rails, black with rust, spanning a bayou that barely moved. He didn't remember seeing it on his route, but he kept driving, the tires rattling over loose planks. As he reached the center, something changed. The wind seemed to die, and a low whisper pressed against the cab. At first, it was easy to blame the wind, but then his name came clear as a bell, spoken in a voice that didn't belong to anyone he knew. Shapes flickered in the fog along the bridge's edge. They moved just out of sight, too tall and thin, swaying in the mist. Sam tried to focus on the road, but the whispers thickened, turning into static on his dashcam, and then laughter. Children's laughter, sharp and sudden, pouring through his radio. He gripped the wheel tighter, heart pounding, as a woman's voice broke through the static, pleading for help. The bridge felt endless, each second stretched thin by the sounds pushing in from every side. When the headlights finally cut through the other side, the world snapped back to normal. The road ahead was empty, the fog thinning. Sam pulled over to catch his breath, telling himself it was just exhaustion. But as he stepped out, he saw muddy handprints smeared low on the driver's door, prints too small to belong to any adult. Inside, on the passenger seat, he found a child's silver bracelet caked with dirt. Local records say the span fell in 1968, taking a busload of kids with it. The story goes that their voices still linger, reaching out to anyone who tries to cross. When Sam brought the bracelet to the police, the officer didn't laugh. "That'd be the Bridge of Whispers," they said, glancing at the bracelet before locking it away. Sam learned he wasn't the first. 4 other drivers had reported the same thing in the past 2 years. Each found something left behind. Each heard the same laughter, and each swore the bridge was gone by daylight. Since that night, Sam refuses to take Old Route 13, no matter how much longer the detour adds. Avoiding the bridge became his way of coping, a small act of control in the face of something he couldn't explain. He keeps his answer short when asked. There's things on that road that don't belong to us. For some, the haunted places are best left alone. Not every driver gets a warning before things go wrong. Sometimes the road itself seems empty until you realize you're not the only one out there. Highway 50 in Nevada is a place where the world feels pared down to its essentials: sand, scrub, and the long black ribbon of road. They call it the loneliest road in America, a stretch where the emptiness presses in and the silence is absolute. For Olivia Chen, a trucker with 5 years behind the wheel, that emptiness was broken by something she still can't explain. At a little past 3 a.m., Olivia was hauling electronics through the desert. The glow from her dashboard barely pushed back the dark. That's when she saw them. A line of military trucks, their faded green paint catching what little light there was. Their headlights flickered in the same rhythm, every movement in perfect sync, as if they were following silent orders. Olivia slowed, falling in behind the convoy. There were at least 6 trucks, all unmarked, no license plates, no insignias. The precision of their driving unsettled her, too exact for chance. Her radio erupted with static, then a burst of beeping, Morse code quick and clipped. Olivia didn't know what it meant, but the pattern repeated, matching the flicker of the convoy's lights. She twisted the dial, but the code kept coming, as if the signal was coming from inside her own cab. Her GPS, usually steady, began to reroute her in endless circles, the digital map spinning through side roads and dead ends that didn't exist. She kept her hands steady, ignoring the machine and focusing on the real road beneath her wheels, but the sense of being led off course only grew. At one point, her speedometer wavered wildly, though she held the same pace. The desert seemed to stretch on forever. When Olivia finally saw a rest stop, just a patch of cracked pavement and a single flickering lamp, she felt a surge of relief. The convoy pulled in ahead of her, and she eased her truck to a stop. But as she blinked, the trucks were gone. The lot sat empty, the only sign of their presence a set of tire tracks that cut through the dust and then ended abruptly, as if the vehicles had simply vanished into thin air. Stepping out, Olivia found a dog tag pressed into the gravel near one of the tracks. Its surface was worn, but the year, 1952, stood out clear. The metal felt cold in her palm. She pocketed the tag, got back in her truck, and drove away, heart racing. That dog tag became her only proof, a physical link to something she couldn't explain. She later discovered declassified files hint at a 1952 military accident in that same stretch of desert, a detail that made the encounter feel even more real. Since that night, Olivia refuses to trust GPS reroutes on empty highways. She memorizes landmarks and keeps paper maps close, relying on what she can see and touch. The story followed her from one truck stop to the next. Other drivers had seen the same convoy, always at 3 a.m., always vanishing without a trace. The details changed, but the sense of something hidden, something just out of reach, remained. Some roads leave drivers with questions that linger long after the pavement ends. Others carry echoes that drift from one highway to another, waiting for someone to hear them. Ray Bones. Jefferson never expected the Blue Ridge Parkway to deliver anything more than a quiet haul and a few hours of solitude. He'd driven its winding Appalachian stretches plenty of times, always with a joke ready for the next way station or a story for the late-night CB crowd. But one night, the familiar route turned strange in a way that left even Ray searching for answers. It started with the radio. The night was still, the hum of the reefer unit steady in the background when his CB sputtered with static, then cleared for a moment. A woman's voice drifted through, not speaking but singing, the melody of an old lullaby. The words blurred together, but the tune was sharp and haunting, the kind that sticks in your head even when you want to forget it. Ray thought maybe another driver was messing around, but the voice was too clear, too close, as if it was coming from somewhere inside the cab. He flicked the CB off, but the lullaby continued, soft and persistent. A few miles further, Ray saw her, barefoot, standing in the middle of the lane, her dress torn and thin despite the cold. He hit the brakes hard, expecting her to leap aside, but when his headlights caught her, she simply vanished. Not into the woods or behind a tree, just gone, without a trace. Ray's hands shook as he rewound his dashcam. The footage showed a woman, but her face was smeared and indistinct, as if the camera refused to capture her. Then the engine died. No warning, no coughing, just a sudden silence that pressed against the glass. Ray tried the ignition, but the truck wouldn't turn over. The lullaby grew louder, filling the cab even with the radio off. For a moment, it felt like the air itself had turned colder, the world shrinking to the inside of the truck and the road outside. When the engine finally sputtered back to life, Ray drove on, counting the seconds until he reached the next truck stop. There, locals didn't need much prompting. They told him about the singer who vanished in 1949, the one whose voice was said to haunt the parkway. She'd been a rising name in the region, gone without a trace after her last show. Some said her songs still echoed through the mountains, searching for a way home. Days later, Ray found an old vinyl record tucked behind his sleeper bunk. The label bore the singer's name and the title of a lullaby he'd never heard before. He didn't own a record player, but he kept it all the same, a reminder that some stories don't end just because you leave them behind. Since then, Ray refuses to run the parkway at night, unless he's got another driver riding shotgun. The experience left a mark, and he doesn't try to hide it. He jokes about ghosts on the CB, but there's a tension in his voice that wasn't there before. For Ray, coping means keeping things light, but he's careful now, more careful than he used to be. He learned that some roads hold on to their stories, and some voices never fade completely. And for drivers who spend their lives chasing the horizon, the line between the ordinary and the impossible can vanish in a moment. There are other places where the boundaries blur, where a simple stop for rest can turn into something far stranger. Hector Alvarez was used to the rhythm of Interstate 5, long stretches of dark highway, the steady hum of tires, the ritual of swapping shifts with his driving partner. On a cold night in Northern California, fatigue set in just after 2:30 a.m. He pulled his truck into a rest area, expecting a brief nap before getting back on the road. The lot appeared ordinary at first glance, but as soon as Hector parked, he noticed something was off. The silence was unnatural. Rest areas usually buzz with idling engines and the shuffle of drivers stretching their legs. Here, the other trucks sat empty, their cabs dark, no voices or movement. Hector stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and scanned the lot. The air felt heavy, the quiet broken only by the faint whir of a distant light. He walked to the vending machines, hoping for a soda to clear his head. Instead, he found rows of snacks in faded wrappers, potato chips and soda cans with logos he hadn't seen since the 1980s. He pressed his hand to the glass and checked the expiration dates. Most had expired decades ago. The machines glowed under harsh fluorescent lights, casting everything in a washed-out, ghostly hue. Hector's unease grew. Something about the place was stuck, as if time itself had stopped. Back in his cab, he locked the doors and tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. When his brake was up, he started the engine and aimed for the exit. He followed the curve of the road, headlights sweeping over the same row of trucks. Minutes passed, but the exit never appeared. The loop brought him right back to where he started. He tried a different direction, then another, but every attempt ended the same way, his truck rolling back into the same deserted lot, the same vending machines flickering in the dark. Panic set in. Hector adjusted his mirrors to keep the lot in view, threw the truck into reverse, and crept backward for nearly a mile. The trees finally thinned, and he found himself back on the open highway. the rest area behind him. The relief was immediate, but it didn't last. On the passenger seat, he found a Polaroid photo. It showed his truck parked in that same lot, but the date scrawled on the edge was a week before he'd arrived. Since that night, Hector avoids rest areas altogether, swapping them for diners or 24-hour parking lots to prevent another loop. The experience left him wary of places that promise rest but deliver something else entirely. Now, he measures safety by the number of people around and the glow of neon signs, never by the promise of a quiet lot. Not every story on the road is about nostalgia or freedom. Sometimes what's waiting by the shoulder is stranger than anything you'd expect. Denise Carter's story begins on Route 66, just outside Tucumcari, New Mexico, a stretch of highway where the desert night seems endless and the silence can press in like a weight. She'd logged more than a decade behind the wheel, but nothing in her experience prepared her for what she found on that empty road. It was close to midnight when Denise spotted a boy walking along the shoulder, his small figure almost swallowed by the darkness. He looked no older than 10, with skin so pale it seemed to catch what little light the moon offered. Denise's first instinct was to help. She slowed, rolled down the window and called out, "Hey kid, you okay?" The boy stopped and turned his head. That's when she saw his eyes, pitch black, without any whites or color, just two voids staring back at her. Denise's hand tightened on the steering wheel, but she told herself it was just a trick of the light. The boy said nothing. He climbed up into the cab when she unlocked the door, settling silently on the passenger seat. His posture was stiff, hands folded in his lap, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Denise tried to coax a word or two out of him, asked his name, where he was headed if he was lost. But he sat unmoving, his face blank and unreadable. The silence in the cab grew heavy. Every time Denise glanced over, she found those black eyes watching the road, never blinking. She drove on, the miles crawling by. The sense of unease grew with every passing minute, until she could barely focus on the road. When the lights of a small gas station appeared ahead, she pulled in, hoping to find someone who might know the boy. She turned off the engine and looked over, but the seat was empty. The passenger door was still locked, the seatbelt untouched. There was no sign he had ever been there. Denise stepped out, searching the lot with her flashlight. That's when she noticed a thin trail of black sand scattered across the passenger floor and down onto the pavement outside. The sand was gritty and cold, darker than anything she'd seen, leaving no question that it hadn't come from the desert itself. She scooped a bit into a napkin, but it crumbled in her hand, leaving only a faint smear. Later, Denise reviewed her dashcam footage. The boy's reflection showed up clear in the passenger side window, but in the mirrors there was nothing. He seemed to exist only in that one sliver of glass, a detail that left her uneasy long after the drive was over. In the weeks that followed, she learned other truckers had seen a black-eyed boy near that same mile marker. Some told of him approaching their rigs in silence, others of him vanishing without a trace. The stories matched hers enough to unsettle even the most skeptical. Since that night, Denise never drives through Tucumcari without her doors locked and music turned up loud, trying to keep the memory of the silence at bay. She avoids that stretch of Route 66 whenever she can, unwilling to risk another encounter. For Denise, the road hasn't felt the same since, and she knows she isn't the only one whose view of the highway changed after a single, inexplicable night. Some places on the map seem ordinary until something reminds you how thin the line is between what's seen and what's left behind. Highway 191 in Utah is a place where the desert's vastness can make even the most seasoned drivers feel exposed. Greg "Tank" Morrison, known for his steady nerves and long hauls, had made this run to Arizona countless times. On this particular night, the sky was clear and the road ahead stretched empty, the kind of isolation that makes every sound sharper and every shadow longer. Near the refinery district, with nothing but open land for miles, Greg's routine was interrupted by something he could never have prepared for. He was holding steady at 60 miles per hour when a blur in his side mirror caught his attention. At first it looked like a trick of the light, maybe heat rising off the pavement, or a reflection from his own headlights. But the shape resolved into a man running alongside the truck, his entire body engulfed in electric blue flames. The fire didn't waver or smoke. It wrapped around the figure, casting sharp flashes across the desert. The man's face appeared in brief glimpses, twisted in a way Greg would later describe as both furious and agonized. Greg's instincts told him to keep his eyes forward, but he couldn't help watching as the figure kept pace, impossible and relentless. Then came the noise. Sharp, percussive slaps against the trailer's metal. Greg gripped the wheel, inching the truck toward the center line as the sound grew louder. The trailer jolted as if something heavy was striking it, each blow matched by the sight of the burning man's hand hitting the side. The encounter lasted only seconds, but it felt stretched out, each heartbeat marked by another slap against the steel. Without warning, the fiery figure veered away, vanishing into the dark as quickly as he'd appeared. The desert fell silent again, leaving only Greg's pulse and the steady hum of the engine. When he reached his delivery point and stepped out to inspect the trailer, Greg found scorched handprints burned into the metal, the outlines blackened and spreading outward like the mark of a branding iron. He circled back to the cab, still unsettled, and spotted his gloves on the dashboard, melted together at the fingertips, warped and fused as if they'd been pressed to a flame. He hadn't touched anything hot all night. The evidence was undeniable and left him rattled. After that night, Greg changed his habits. He started refusing pre-dawn runs on Highway 191, insisting on daylight hauls whenever possible. If he couldn't avoid the route, he brought along an extra crew member for support. The experience left him cautious in ways he'd never been before, alert to every odd flicker in his mirrors and every unexplained sound on the road. He tried to make sense of what happened by asking around. Locals told him about a refinery worker who died in a fire back in 1975, trying to stop a chemical spill from reaching the highway. They said the man's spirit never left, appearing as the burning man to those who passed through the area at night. Greg checked his dash cam, but all he found was static during the encounter. No figure, just garbled noise, and a sense that something had pressed itself into his memory for good. Stories like Greg's remind drivers that not all dangers on the highway come from what you can see. Sometimes the road itself seems to test newcomers and veterans alike, each with their own mystery waiting just around the next bend. Jasmine Lee's first year on the road was supposed to be about learning routines, not unraveling mysteries. She was new to the long hauls, still getting used to the hours and the steady thrum of Interstate 95 in South Carolina. Her trailer carried a full load of new electronics, the kind of cargo that should have meant a straightforward trip and a clean delivery. But as she settled into the drive, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing behind her. With each mile, the trailer seemed to lighten, the resistance she expected from the weight slowly fading away. She tried to reason it out. Maybe the road was smoother than usual, or maybe she was just tired. But the sensation grew more obvious, and by the time she reached a rest stop, she felt almost certain that her load was gone. The lot was mostly empty, the quiet broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Jasmine stepped out with her flashlight, unlocked the trailer, and swung the doors wide. Where she expected to see neatly wrapped pallets of electronics, Jasmine found only stacks of yellowed newspapers. their pages brittle and curling at the edges. The air inside the trailer smelled musty, thick with dust. Lying among the papers was a single rusted key, heavy, cold, and caked with grime. Jasmine picked it up, holding it in her gloved hand for a long moment, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The newspapers crumbled at her touch, leaving ash on her fingers. None of it belonged in her trailer. Unsure of what to do next, Jasmine called her dispatcher, her voice low and tense as she explained what she'd found. When help arrived, they pulled security footage from the highway. What they saw only deepened the mystery. The video showed Jasmine's truck in motion, then a flicker, frames distorting as if the film itself was tearing. In a matter of seconds, the cargo vanished, replaced by shifting shadows that moved across the empty space inside the trailer. There was no sign of a break-in, no explanation for how the freight could disappear in plain sight. Later, the rusted key Jasmine had found proved to match the lock on a warehouse a few miles away, a building left to rot at the edge of town. Locals said it was a graveyard for lost freight, a place where missing shipments from decades past turned up without warning. Jasmine never went inside, but the connection between the key and her missing load was enough to unsettle her. She never recovered the electronics. The key now sits in her glove box, a reminder of how quickly the familiar can slip into the unknown. Since that night, Jasmine's routine changed. She inspects every trailer with a flashlight before locking up, and she carries a heavy padlock that looks almost identical to the rusted key, her own way of keeping control over what she can. The memory lingers each time she checks her mirrors or feels a shift in the weight behind her. There are stretches of road where the ordinary rules seem to break down, where a driver's sense of what's real can slip just out of reach. And sometimes it's not just the landscape that makes you question your place in the world. The Alaska Highway forces even the most seasoned drivers to confront the limits of their own endurance. Tom Grizzly Evans, known for his steady hand and blunt outlook, had weathered countless storms along those unforgiving Yukon miles. He thought he'd seen it all, until a night when the cold seemed to reach deeper than usual, and the road's silence pressed in on every side. A blizzard swept over the highway, the wind howling and snow falling so thick it erased the world beyond the threshold of his vision. Tom hunched forward, eyes straining to catch the faintest sign of the road. That's when he saw her, a girl in a white dress standing motionless in the center lane. The dress was impossibly clean, her hair unmoving despite the storm. She didn't flinch as his headlights bore down, didn't seem to notice the biting cold. Tom hit the brakes, feeling the weight of his rig slide on the ice, heart pounding as the truck ground to a halt. But when he looked again, the road was empty. No sign of the girl, not even a footprint in the snow. He sat in the cab, engine idling, trying to convince himself it was just exhaustion. Then he noticed frost creeping across the inside of his windshield, the patterns too deliberate to be random. The ice traced out letters, one after another, until the word help stood out in jagged white. The message seemed to pulse in the dashboard light, a silent plea that cut through the numbness in his hands. A warning bell chimed, and Tom's eyes dropped to the gauges. The temperature needle plunged past 0, dropping to negative 63 degrees Fahrenheit, a reading so low it defied belief, even out here. The cab grew colder, his breath fogging the air. He tried to focus on the routine, checking the heater, tapping the gauge, watching for any sign that the storm would ease. But the cold only deepened, and the memory of the girl lingered at the edge of his thoughts. When the storm finally broke, Tom made it to the next town and pulled into a mechanic's bay. He told the story quietly, expecting a skeptical look, but the mechanic only nodded. "You saw her," the man said. Back in '63, a girl disappeared out here during a storm like this. They found her car, but not her. The words settled over Tom like a second chill. The effects didn't vanish with the weather. For weeks, Tom's temperature gauge stayed locked at negative 63 degrees Fahrenheit, no matter how many times it was checked or replaced. He swore the cab never truly warmed up again, a reminder that the cold could reach places machinery couldn't fix. Since that night, Tom runs diagnostic checks on his truck every evening, and he refuses to drive alone through blizzards if he can help it. The encounter left him wary in ways he never expected, attuned to the smallest shift in temperature, the faintest mark on the glass. Some truckers find their sense of safety shaken by what the road throws at them. Others, like Tom, adapt their routines, hoping to keep the unexplained at bay. But the Alaska Highway has a reputation for changing the way drivers look at even the simplest job, and the stories don't always end with the storm. Sometimes the aftermath is what lingers longest, shaping every decision that comes after. Some jobs in trucking come with their own sense of risk, but for Eric Vasquez, the warning signs were there from the start. As a flatbed driver, he was used to last-minute assignments and unfamiliar companies. Sometimes that's how you fill the gaps between steady runs. On this night, the offer came in late. A single crate, decent pay, and a pickup from a company he'd never worked with before. The urgency, the anonymity, and the promise of quick money were all part of the deal. He told himself there was nothing out of the ordinary as he pulled into the lot where the shipment waited. The crate took up most of his trailer, wrapped in heavy canvas. Securing it, Eric felt a low vibration through his gloves, a steady hum rising from the wood. He paused, listening. The crate seemed to breathe. Soft whispers drifted out, just on the edge of hearing, in a language he didn't recognize. The sound was faint enough to make him question whether he'd imagined it. He shook off the unease, finished his checks, and pulled out onto the Oklahoma Turnpike. For the first hour, the drive was routine, but the hum didn't fade. Even with music up, Eric felt the vibration in the steering wheel, a pulse that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. He found himself glancing at the mirrors, searching the shadows behind the trailer. The whispers grew stronger, still unintelligible but now threaded with an odd melody. The longer he drove, the more the unease settled in his chest. He arrived at the delivery site near midnight. The warehouse, set on the edge of a small town, was dark and silent. Eric killed the engine and stepped out, expecting to find someone waiting. The place was abandoned. No lights, no movement, just the echo of his own footsteps. He knocked on the metal doors and circled the building with his flashlight, but nobody answered. The cracked asphalt and boarded-up windows told him all he needed to know. Frustrated, he decided to leave the crate by the loading dock and be done with it. As he rolled the crate off the trailer, the hum spiked, pressing against his ears. The whispers rose again, sharper now, almost pleading. Eric didn't linger. He left the tarp in place, climbed back into his cab, and started down the highway, hoping to leave the unease behind. Halfway home, his phone rang. The screen showed his own number. Eric answered, and a distorted version of his own voice came through. "Don't accept phantom loads again." The call ended as suddenly as it began. The temperature in the cab dropped, and for a moment, the road ahead seemed to stretch on forever. After that night, Eric changed how he worked. He now cross-checks every company's credentials, refuses loads from unverified shippers, and triple-checks paperwork before accepting any assignment. The economic pressure is still there, but the memory of that night keeps him cautious. He never found out what was inside the crate or who sent it. All that remained was a sense that some jobs are best left alone. On highways that seem empty, It's easy to believe you're the only one out there. But sometimes the road has other plans, and even when the world feels deserted, you're not as alone as you think. U.S. Route 2 in North Dakota runs straight through a landscape so flat and open it can feel like the world itself is holding its breath. Maria Gutierrez knew the stretch well, having driven it many times as a team driver. On that October night, her partner slept soundly in the back, leaving Maria alone at the wheel with only the hum of the engine and the endless dark for company. She focused on the road, counting down the miles, expecting nothing but the usual monotony. The first sign that something was wrong came as a flicker in her peripheral vision. Maria caught the outline of a tall, thin figure standing just off the shoulder, unmoving. She thought it might be a signpost at first, but as her headlights swept past, the shape resolved into something human-like. Its face was lost in shadow, but its eyes glowed bright and steady, reflecting her beams with an unnatural intensity. A few miles later, another figure appeared, then another, each one stationed along the roadside, spaced out with an eerie precision. They never moved, never turned their heads, but every one of them faced her truck directly, their gaze fixed and unblinking. Maria's hands tightened on the wheel. She scanned the mirrors, half expecting to see the figures following, but they remained rooted in place. The silence inside the cab grew heavier with every passing mile. Her partner's steady breathing from the sleeper only deepened her sense of isolation. He was there, but unreachable, leaving Maria alone to witness the impossible. The figures continued for miles, always the same, tall, motionless, eyes shining out of the dark. Maria felt exposed, as if the road itself had become a stage, and she was the only actor left under the lights. The sense of being watched was overwhelming. When she glanced down at her dashcam, she saw static flicker across the screen, the feed breaking up into jagged lines. Then, in a single frame, the image sharpened. Dozens of faces pressed against her windshield, mouths open in silent shapes, eyes wide and empty. Maria jerked her gaze up, but the glass was clear except for a dusting of frost. She kept driving until the first hint of dawn, then pulled into a truck stop and started asking around. Locals told her about the Watchers, spirits of travelers who never made it home, bound to the roadside. They said some nights the Watchers stand guard, waiting for someone to notice. Others claimed that if you see their eyes, you'll never feel alone on that road again. Maria replayed the corrupted dashcam footage, showing her partner the one intact frame, but he shrugged it off as a glitch. His obliviousness only made Maria feel more alone with what she'd seen. The experience left a mark. Now, Maria plans her routes to avoid that stretch of Route 2 at night whenever possible. When she can't, she runs guided audio or music in the cab, never letting silence settle in. She checks her mirrors often, always alert for a glimmer of eyes in the dark. The Watchers became part of her story, a reminder of how quickly the ordinary can turn strange when the road empties out. For truckers like Maria, the road is more than just a way from point A to point B. It's a place where the familiar can vanish and new rules take hold, rules written by fear, memory, and the things that wait just beyond the reach of the headlights. They say truckers see more than tail lights and mile markers. Out on the road, far from city lights and crowded spaces, they witness things most of us never will. From ghostly children and cursed crates to figures that burn but never burn out. These stories show just how often the extraordinary finds those who spend their nights behind the wheel. Have you ever seen something on the road you couldn't explain? Share your own encounters in the comments below. And for these drivers, the true test isn't what they saw. It's how they lived after facing it.